The Vorlon Empire had ruled the outer stars for 400 years. No species in known space had ever beaten them in open war. Their fleets were huge, their weapons were strong, and their radar systems could see a single rock the size of a fist from 1,000,000 miles away. They were proud of this. They told every young officer in their academies that the Vorlon Empire had eyes everywhere, and that nothing could hide from them. That belief was about to break. It started on a quiet night watch at Outpost Kelvara 9, a small radar station near the edge of Vorlon space. The station sat alone in the dark, watching the empty border between Vorlon territory and human territory. Nothing ever happened there. The officer on duty, a young Vorlon named Trask, was half asleep in his chair when his screen blinked once and went black. He sat up fast. He tapped the screen. Nothing happened. He checked the power. The power was fine. He checked the antenna array outside. It was fine too. But the radar showed nothing. No stars, no ships, no data at all. It was as if the whole system had simply stopped working. Trask called his supervisor. "Sir, my radar is down." "Reboot it," said the supervisor, sounding bored. Trask rebooted it. Still nothing. For 11 minutes, Outpost Kelvara 9 had no radar at all. Then, just as suddenly as it had failed, the screen flickered back to life. Stars appeared. Distance markers appeared. Everything looked normal again. Trask breathed out and rubbed his eyes. He decided it was a small glitch, the kind of thing that happens sometimes with old equipment. He wrote a short report and went back to watching his empty screen. He had no idea that something had just crossed through that empty space, less than 200,000 miles from his station, while his radar was blind. That something was a single human battleship. Its name was the UNS Wraith, and it was not a small ship. It was the size of a small city, built from dark gray metal, carrying enough weapons to level a planet's defenses. But size was not what made the Wraith dangerous. It was something else, something buried deep in its hull, that no alien engineer had ever seen before. Inside the ship, on the bridge, stood Captain Marcus Reyes. He was not a young man. He had gray hair at his temples, and lines on his face, from years of hard decisions. He had fought in 3 wars before this one, and he had learned that the loudest ships were rarely the ones that survived. Quiet ships survived. Careful ships survived. He stood with his hands behind his back, watching the main screen, where a slow, steady line marked the ship's path, deeper into Vorlan territory. "Report," he said. His tactical officer, a woman named Lieutenant Aisha Okafor, checked her console. "We just passed Outpost Kelvara 9, Captain. Their radar was active for most of the approach, but it dropped out completely for the last 11 minutes. We are now past their range." "Good," Reyes said. "Keep the field steady. No mistakes." "Yes, sir." Behind Reyes, near the back of the bridge, stood a smaller woman, in a lab coat instead of a uniform. Her name was Dr. Elena Cho, and she was the reason the Wraith could do what it was doing. She had spent 6 years of her life building the system now humming quietly in the ship's core, a system she called the distortion field, though most of the crew just called it the ghost. "How is it holding up?" Reyes asked her, without turning around. "Better than expected," Elena said. "We're not invisible, Captain. I need to remind you of that every day, because I worry someone will forget it and get us all killed. We are not invisible. We just make it very, very hard for radar and sensors to see us clearly. Their systems catch pieces of us, glitches, ghosts of data. But the computers on the other end are built to throw away noise, so they throw us away too. And if they build a system that doesn't throw away noise," Elena's face grew serious, "then we would be in trouble. But building a system like that takes years, Captain. The Vorlon Empire has never needed one. Nobody has ever done what we are doing. As far as they know, this is impossible." Reyes nodded slowly. That was exactly why they had chosen this mission for the Wraith, and exactly why it was so dangerous. They were doing something the enemy did not believe could be done. The Vorlon Empire trusted its radar completely. Every fleet, every outpost, every planetary defense system was built around the assumption that nothing could sneak past a Vorlon sensor grid. That trust was about to become their biggest weakness. 3 weeks earlier, back at Earth's High Command, this mission had been argued over for 2 full days. Some officers wanted to send a fleet, a show of force. a message that humanity could match the Vorlan Empire ship for ship. Admiral Grace Whitfield, the officer who finally approved the mission, had disagreed. "They have 10 times our numbers," she had said in the final briefing. "If we send a fleet, we lose. If we send one ship that they cannot see, we send a message no fleet could ever send. We tell them that their whole way of fighting a war doesn't work against us." The mission itself had a simple goal, though a dangerous one. Deep inside Vorlan space, on a prison world called Draxus Hold, the Vorlan military was holding 12 human prisoners. They were the crew of a science vessel captured 2 years earlier, during a border dispute that both sides had tried to explain away as an accident. Officially, Earth and the Vorlan Empire were not at war. Unofficially, both sides knew that war was close, and those 12 prisoners were a piece on the board neither side wanted to lose. Reyes had one job: get in, get the prisoners, get out, without the Vorlan Empire ever learning how he did it. If they learned about the distortion field, they would find a way to beat it eventually. If they never learned, the fear alone would do half of Earth's work for them. "ETA to the first checkpoint?" Reyes asked. 6 hours, Captain, Okafor answered. "We'll pass near Vorlan Fleet Yard 7. It's the biggest shipbuilding station in this sector. Lots of traffic, lots of radar." "Then we go slow," Reyes said. "No sudden moves. Elena, how much power can we spare for the field if we need to pass close?" "I can push it to 90% for short bursts," Elena said. "But that pulls power from weapons and shields. If something finds us while the field is at 90%, we will be very hard to defend." Reyes considered this. "Understood. Keep it at 70, unless I say otherwise." The Wraith moved on through the dark, quiet as its name suggested, sliding past star systems that had never known a human ship could reach this deep into enemy territory. Behind it, confusion was starting to spread. At Vorlan Fleet Yard 7, a massive station orbiting a red gas giant, hundreds of workers and soldiers went about their business, unaware that anything unusual was happening. But in the control room, a senior officer named Commander Yelva Tren stared at a screen showing a strange pattern of interference. It was small, almost nothing, a faint smear across one corner of the display that came and went every few minutes. "What is that?" she asked her technician. "Not sure, Commander. Some kind of solar interference, maybe. It doesn't match any known signature. Run a full diagnostic." The technician did. The diagnostic came back clean. Every system checked out fine. Yelva frowned at the screen for a long moment before deciding it wasn't worth escalating. Solar flares caused strange readings all the time out here. She logged it and moved on. She did not know that the Wraith had passed within 400,000 miles of her station less than an hour before. This pattern repeated itself again and again as the Wraith continued its journey. A small glitch here, a dropped signal there, a radar operator blinking twice, at a strange smear on his screen, before deciding it meant nothing. No single event was alarming enough to raise an alarm. But slowly, quietly, a pattern was forming across dozens of stations and outposts throughout the sector, a pattern that nobody was yet putting together. On the bridge of the Wraith, the crew worked in near silence, each person focused on their task. Reyes walked the length of the bridge, checking on his people the way he always did, before a difficult stretch of the mission. He stopped by the young weapons officer, a man named Ensign Cole Barrett, who was barely 2 years out of the academy. "How are you holding up, Ensign?" Barrett straightened in his seat. "Fine, sir. A little nervous, sir, if I'm honest." "Good," Reyes said. "Nervous means you understand where we are. Just remember your training, and trust your crewmates. That's all any of us can do out here." Barrett nodded, looking a little steadier. Reyes returned to the center of the bridge and looked at the main screen, where the star systems of the Vorlan Empire stretched out ahead of them like a field of quiet lights, each one hiding an unknown number of enemy ships and stations. Somewhere far ahead, past a dozen more systems, sat Draxus Hold, and the 12 prisoners waiting for a rescue they did not know was coming. He thought about the size of what they were doing. One ship, deep in the heart of enemy space, invisible, not because of magic or impossible technology, but because of one scientist's stubborn refusal to give up on an idea everyone else had called impossible. Elena Cho had spent 6 years building something out of nothing, working nights and weekends long after her funding had nearly been cut twice. because she believed that stealth, real stealth, was the only way a smaller fleet could survive against a bigger one. She had been right. Now it was up to Reyes and his crew to prove it could work when it mattered most. "Captain," Okafor said suddenly, breaking the quiet, "I'm picking up a Vorland patrol group ahead. 3 cruisers, moving on a standard patrol route. They'll cross our path in about 40 minutes if we hold our current course." Reyes studied the display. "Options? We could slow down and let them pass first," Okafor said. "Adds about 2 hours to our timeline, but it's safer. Or we hold course and rely on the field to get us through unseen." Reyes glanced back at Elena. "The field held against Fleet Yard 7, Elena said. 3 cruisers on a routine patrol should not be a problem, as long as we don't do anything to draw their attention." Reyes made his decision quickly, the way he always did. "Hold course. Quiet ship, everyone. No unnecessary chatter. No unnecessary power use. Let's see if the Vorlan Empire notices its own patrol ships sailing right past us." The bridge fell into a tense, focused silence as the Wraith continued forward, sliding steadily toward the patrol group ahead, carrying its secret deeper and deeper into the heart of enemy territory, 1 quiet mile at a time. 40 minutes later, the 3 Vorlan cruisers appeared on the Wraith screens, exactly where predicted, moving in a slow, lazy formation, their crews clearly relaxed after months of uneventful patrol duty. Reyes watched them grow closer on the display, feeling the tension in the bridge rise with every passing minute. "Distance to closest cruiser?" he asked quietly. 80,000 miles and closing, sir," Okafor answered, her voice equally low, as though the enemy might somehow hear them speak. "They're on a standard sweep pattern, no sign they've detected us." On board the lead Vorlan cruiser, a board sensor officer named Draith watched his screen with half-closed eyes. It was the end of a long shift, and nothing ever happened out here. He noticed, briefly, a strange shimmer on the edge of his display, a faint smudge that lasted only a few seconds before fading away. He almost called it in. Almost. But he had seen dozens of similar glitches over the years, and every single one of them had turned out to be nothing. He decided this one would be the same, rubbed his tired eyes, and let his focus drift back to counting down the minutes until his shift ended. He never knew that a ship larger than his own had passed within sight of his sensors, close enough that under normal conditions, alarms should have been screaming through his entire cruiser. The Wraith slid past the patrol group and continued on, leaving the 3 cruisers behind, their crews still unaware of how close they had come to discovering the greatest secret in the war that had not yet officially begun. On the bridge, Reyes finally allowed himself to breathe out slowly. "Report." "Clear, Captain," Okafor said, relief clear in her voice. "We're past them. No detection." A few quiet murmurs of relief moved through the bridge crew, though nobody cheered. They all understood this was only the beginning. Ahead of them lay dozens more systems, dozens more chances for the field to fail, dozens more moments where one mistake could turn a quiet rescue mission into a war nobody was ready for. Reyes looked at the long path still ahead of them on the main screen, then turned to his crew. "Good work, everyone. Get some rest if you can. 6 hours until the next checkpoint, and then things start getting harder." He did not tell them everything he was thinking, but every experienced officer on that bridge understood the same thing, without needing to be told. So far, they had been lucky, and they had been careful. But somewhere out there, the Vorlan Empire's own radar systems were quietly failing again and again, leaving behind a trail of small, strange, unexplained glitches that someone, eventually, was going to notice. The question was not whether the Vorlan Empire would eventually realize something was wrong. The question was whether the Wraith would reach Drax's hold, free the prisoners, and disappear back into the dark before that happened. Far behind them, at Fleet Yard 7, Commander Yelva Tren sat alone in her office that night, unable to sleep, her mind returning again and again to that strange, unexplained smear on her screen. She pulled up the station's logs and began comparing them against reports from nearby outposts, just out of curiosity, just to satisfy her own unease. What she found made her sit up straight in her chair. Outpost Kelvara 9 had reported an 11-minute radar failure on the same night. 2 smaller listening posts along the same general path had reported brief, unexplained sensor glitches within hours of each other. Individually, none of it meant anything. But laid out together, in a rough line stretching from the border deep into Vorlon territory. The pattern was unmistakable. Something was moving through Vorlon space, undetected, leaving behind nothing but a trail of broken radar and confused officers who had learned, one after another, to dismiss what they were seeing. Yelva stared at the pattern for a long time, her hands cold despite the warm air of her office. Then she reached for her communicator and began composing an urgent message to Fleet Command, unaware that she was the very first person in the entire Vorlon Empire to understand, even a little, just how much danger they were truly in. Commander Yelva Tren's message reached Vorlon Fleet Command 18 hours later, and it did not land well. Grand Admiral Kaldrek Voss was not a man who liked surprises. He had spent 40 years climbing the ranks of the Vorlon military, and he had done it by being right more often than anyone else in the room. He believed in strength, in numbers, in the simple truth that had guided the Empire for 4 centuries. The biggest fleet with the best sensors always won. He did not believe in ghosts. So when a junior fleet yard commander sent him a report claiming that an unknown object had somehow slipped past 4 separate radar stations without being detected even once, his first reaction was irritation. "She's seeing shadows," he said to his aide, tossing the datapad onto his desk. "Solar interference, equipment faults, this happens every year in that sector." "The pattern is unusual, sir," the aide said carefully. 4 separate failures, along a single line, over a short period of time. Commander Tren has flagged it as a possible stealth incursion. Voss laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Stealth, there is no such thing as true stealth, not against Vorlon sensor arrays. We have spent 300 years refining that technology. No species in known space has ever managed to hide a ship larger than a shuttle from our radar, not even for a few seconds, let alone across 4 different stations." But even as he said it, a small, uncomfortable thought crossed his mind. He did not like that thought, so he pushed it away. "Send a routine patrol to sweep the area," he said finally. "Nothing urgent. If they find nothing, which they will, we close the file." The aide nodded and left to carry out the order, and Grand Admiral Voss returned to the dozens of other reports on his desk, already forgetting about the strange little pattern from a border sector nobody important cared about. 400 million miles away, the Wraith continued its silent journey, unaware that its passage had already caused the first ripple of concern within the highest levels of Vorlon command, even if that concern had been quickly dismissed. On the bridge, Captain Reyes studied the star charts with Lieutenant Okafor, planning the next leg of their route. They had passed 2 more checkpoints without incident, each one a little tenser than the last, each one a reminder of how much could go wrong with a single mistake. "We're entering the more populated part of their territory now," Okafor said, tracing a path across the display. "More outposts, more patrol routes, more traffic in general. The field has held up well so far, but the margin for error gets smaller from here." "Understood," Reyes said. "Elena, how's the field holding?" Dr. Elena Cho, sitting at a side console with a dozen readouts spread in front of her, did not look up right away. She had barely left that station in the last 2 days, catching sleep in short stretches, always watching the numbers that mattered more than anyone else's on the ship. "It's holding, but not perfectly," she said finally. "There's a very slight drift in the field harmonics, something I didn't see in testing. It's small, less than 0.1%, but it's growing slowly. I don't know why yet." Reyes felt his stomach tighten. "Is it dangerous?" "Not yet," Elena said. "At this rate, it would take weeks to become a real problem. But I don't like not knowing why it's happening. I'm going to keep monitoring it." "Keep me informed," Reyes said. "Anything changes, I want to know immediately." "You will," Elena promised. Reyes turned back to the star charts, but his mind lingered on Elena's words. A drift, however small, was the kind of thing that could turn a perfect mission into a disaster if it went unnoticed for too long. He trusted Elena completely, but he also understood that they were doing something that had never been done before, and things that had never been done before rarely went exactly according to plan. 6 hours later, deep in Vorlon space, 3 patrol cruisers moved slowly along their assigned route. The same lazy sweep pattern they followed every week, checking sensor readings that almost never showed anything unusual. This patrol, however, had received new orders before setting out. "Pay closer attention than usual. and report any strange readings immediately, no matter how small. The order had come down from Fleet Command, passed along without much explanation, and most of the crew treated it as just another bit of bureaucratic nonsense. But the sensor officer on the lead cruiser, a careful young Vorlan named Ensign Selamar, took the order seriously. She had always taken her job seriously, ever since she was a child watching old war footage of the Vorlan Empire's great fleet victories, dreaming of the day she would serve on a bridge of her own. 3 hours into the patrol, her screen flickered. It was brief, barely half a second, but Sella had been staring at that screen so intently that she caught it immediately. A tiny distortion, a smear of static in the upper left corner of her display, gone almost as soon as it appeared. Most officers would have dismissed it. Sella did not. "Captain," she said, turning to her commanding officer, "I just picked up a brief anomaly on sensors. Very small, gone almost instantly. But given our orders, I think we should investigate." The cruiser's captain, an older officer named Draxus Kell, raised an eyebrow but did not argue. "Position?" Sella gave him the coordinates. Kell studied them for a moment, then nodded. "Alter course. Let's take a closer look." Aboard the Wraith, Lieutenant Okafor's console chimed softly. "Captain, the patrol cruisers just changed course. They're heading toward our position." Reyes felt the tension return to the bridge instantly. "Do they have a lock on us?" "Unclear," Okafor said, studying the data. "Their course change is gradual, not aggressive. It could be a coincidence, or they might have picked up something small and are investigating." "Elena?" "The field is still holding," Elena said, her eyes locked on her readouts. "If they had a real lock on us, I'd expect their approach to be much more direct. This looks more like they're checking a hunch." Reyes weighed his options quickly. They could change course themselves, avoiding the patrol entirely, but that risked drawing more attention if the patrol noticed a corresponding shift in whatever faint signal they had detected. Or they could hold steady, trust the field, and hope the patrol lost interest before getting close enough to confirm anything. "Hold course," Reyes said finally. "Reduce all non-essential power. Elena, can you tighten the field without pushing past a safe level?" "I can bring it to 80%, Elena said. "That should help, but it will use more power than I'd like this far from a recharge point." "Do it," Reyes said. "Everyone, quiet ship. No unnecessary movement, no unnecessary noise." The bridge crew settled into a tense silence as the 3 Vorlan cruisers drew closer on the display, moving steadily toward the location of that brief, half-second anomaly that Ensign Selamar had refused to ignore. On the lead cruiser, Sella watched her screen intently as they approached the coordinates. For a long, tense stretch, nothing appeared. No further anomalies, no strange readings, nothing but the quiet emptiness of space, exactly as it should look. "Anything?" Captain Kell asked. "No, sir," Sella admitted, disappointment clear in her voice. "Nothing since that first reading." Kell studied the empty display for a long moment, considering. Part of him wanted to dismiss it entirely and return to their patrol route, but something about Sella's insistence and the unusual orders from Fleet Command made him hesitate. "Hold position for 10 minutes, he said. "Full sensor sweep, all frequencies. If we find nothing, we move on." Aboard the Wraith, less than 60,000 miles away, Reyes watched the Vorlan cruisers stop and hold their position, exactly where his ship had passed only minutes before. "They've stopped," Okafor reported quietly, "running a full sensor sweep." "Elena, hold the field steady," Reyes said. "We don't move until they do." For 10 long minutes, the Wraith sat motionless in the dark, its engines at the barest minimum needed to maintain position, its crew barely breathing, as they waited to see whether their greatest secret was about to be discovered. On the Vorlan cruiser, the full sensor sweep completed, and Sella studied the results carefully, hoping to find something, anything, that would justify her earlier alarm. The results came back clean. Completely, perfectly clean, as though nothing unusual had ever been there at all. She frowned at her screen, disappointed but also strangely unsettled. A part of her had been so certain that she had seen something real, but the sensors insisted there was nothing there. "Report?" Kell asked. "Nothing, sir," she admitted. "The sweep is clean. I don't understand it. I know what I saw." Kell considered her words for a moment, then made his decision. Log it as an unresolved anomaly, and note the coordinates. We'll pass it along in our patrol report. For now, we return to our route. Sella nodded, still frowning at her screen, unable to shake the feeling that something had been very close to her ship, close enough to see, yet somehow completely invisible to every instrument she had. Aboard the Wraith, the crew watched with tense relief as the 3 Vorlon cruisers slowly resumed their original patrol route, moving away from the Wraith's position and back toward their assigned path. "They're leaving," Okafor confirmed, her voice filled with quiet relief. Resuming standard patrol. Reyes finally allowed his shoulders to relax, if only slightly. "Good work, everyone. Elena, bring the field back to 70%. Let's not push our luck any further than we already have." "Already on it," Elena said, though her expression remained troubled. Reyes noticed. "What's wrong?" "That was close," Elena said quietly. "Closer than I expected this deep in their territory. If that sensor officer had been a little more thorough, or if our field had drifted just a little more than it has, they might have found us." "But they didn't," Reyes said. "This time," Elena replied. "Captain, I need to be honest with you. The drift I mentioned earlier, it's not fully explained yet, and moments like this make me nervous about pushing the field as hard as we just did. Every time we spike the power like that, I worry it's accelerating whatever is causing the drift." Reyes studied her for a long moment. He respected Elena Cho more than almost anyone else on his crew, not just for her brilliance, but for her honesty. She never oversold her own work, and she never hid problems from him, even when doing so might have been easier. "Do what you need to do," he said. "If you need to slow our approach to study the problem, tell me, and we'll adjust the timeline. I would rather arrive late and safe than arrive early and discovered." Elena nodded, grateful for his trust. "I'll keep monitoring it. For now, I think we're fine to continue, just more carefully than before." The Wraith resumed its slow, careful journey, deeper into Vorlon space, its narrow escape from Selamar's sharp eyes, a warning to everyone aboard that their mission, however successful so far, remained as dangerous as it had been on the very first day. Back at Fleet Command, Grand Admiral Voss received the patrol report 2 days later, along with dozens of other routine reports from across the sector. He read through Selamar's account of the unexplained anomaly, with the same mild irritation he had felt when first hearing about Commander Tren's original report. 2 unresolved anomalies, however, was harder to dismiss than one, even for a man as confident as Voss. He called Commander Tren directly this time, rather than leaving the matter to his aides. "Your report," he said without preamble, when her face appeared on his screen. "And now this patrol incident." 2 separate reports of unexplained readings, both dismissed by their own sensor sweeps as false alarms, yet both occurring along what appears to be a consistent path. "What is your assessment, Commander?" Tren straightened, clearly surprised to be speaking with the Grand Admiral directly, but she answered without hesitation. "Sir, I believe something is moving through our territory that our current sensor technology cannot reliably track. The pattern suggests a single object, moving on a relatively consistent heading, deeper into our space." "Impossible," Voss said, though with less certainty in his voice than before. "Nothing can consistently evade Vorlan sensors. We would need a technology beyond anything currently known, beyond anything even theoretical, to achieve what you are describing." "I understand that, sir," Tren said carefully. "I cannot explain how it is happening. I can only tell you what the data shows." Voss was quiet for a long moment, staring at something beyond his screen, his mind working through possibilities he did not want to consider. Finally, he spoke again. "I am authorizing a full sensor grid analysis across the affected sector. I want every anomaly, no matter how small, logged and cross-referenced. If there is truly something moving through our space undetected, I want to know exactly where it has been, and more importantly, where it might be going." "Yes, sir," Tren said. "And Commander," Voss added, his voice growing colder. "If this turns out to be nothing, if this is simply a series of equipment failures and overactive imaginations, there will be consequences for wasting Fleet Command's time. Do you understand?" "I understand, sir," Tren said, though she did not look worried. She had seen the data herself. She knew what she had found. The connection ended, and Voss sat alone in his office for a long time afterward, staring at a star map of his own empire, his mind returning again and again to a question he had never seriously considered before. What if something truly was moving through Vorlon space, unseen, unstoppable, heading toward a destination none of them yet understood? He did not yet know that the destination was Drax's Hold, a prison world holding 12 human captives, or that the ship responsible for the strange pattern of failures across his sector was, at that very moment, sliding past yet another unsuspecting outpost, one careful mile closer, to a rescue that would soon become the opening chapter of a legend the Vorlon Empire would spend generations trying to forget. Grand Admiral Voss's sensor grid analysis took 4 days to complete, and when it finally landed on his desk, it changed everything. The report laid out, in careful detail, every unexplained anomaly recorded across the sector over the past 2 weeks. Alone, each one had seemed small, easy to dismiss. Together, mapped out on a single chart, they formed a clear and unmistakable line, stretching from the border near human territory deep into the heart of Vorlon space, moving steadily, patiently, toward a cluster of systems that included several important military assets, and one prison world, Drax's Hold. Voss stared at the map for a long time before calling an emergency meeting of his senior staff. Within the hour, a dozen officers had gathered in the command center aboard his flagship, the Dominion's Reach, a massive vessel that served as the beating heart of the Vorlon sector fleet. "I want everyone to look at this carefully," Voss said, projecting the anomaly map onto the main screen. 14 separate incidents, spread across 2 weeks, forming a single consistent path. I no longer believe this is equipment failure or overactive imaginations. Something is moving through our space, and based on this heading, it appears to be moving toward Drax's Hold. A murmur ran through the room. One of his fleet commanders, a heavy-set officer named Bregdal Voss, spoke up first. "Sir, with respect, what would anyone want with Drax's Hold? It's a prison world. Low value, minimal strategic importance beyond the prisoners themselves." "The prisoners," Voss said grimly. 12 human prisoners, captured 2 years ago. I do not believe this is a coincidence." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. If Voss was right, this meant that a single, unidentified vessel, capable of evading their entire sensor network, was heading deep into their territory for the purpose of a prisoner rescue. It was an audacious idea, bordering on absurd. No single ship, human or otherwise, should have been able to move so deep into Vorlon space without being detected and destroyed within the first day. "How is this possible?" asked another officer, a science division representative named Dr. Kar Alessa. "Our sensor technology has been refined for centuries. Nothing should be capable of consistent evasion at this scale." "That is precisely the question I want answered," Voss said. "Dr. Alessa, I want your division working around the clock on this. I want to understand what technology could produce this pattern of failures. In the meantime, Commander Voss, I want every available warship in this sector redirected toward Drax's Hold. If something is heading there, I intend for it to find the most heavily defended prison world in the entire Empire waiting for it." "Yes, sir," Voss said, already turning to relay the orders. "And Commander Tren," Voss added, turning to the officer who had first raised the alarm. "Your instincts were correct. I want you personally overseeing the sensor analysis for this operation. If anyone in this fleet can find a way to detect this thing, it will be you." Tren nodded, a mixture of pride and unease crossing her face. She had been right, but being right about something this dangerous brought little comfort. Over the following 2 days, the Vorlon military mobilized with a speed and intensity rarely seen outside of full-scale war. Additional warships arrived at Drax's Hold from 3 neighboring systems, tripling the prison world's defenses within 48 hours. Sensor arrays were reconfigured, additional listening posts were deployed along the suspected path, and every available scientist in the sector was pulled into Dr. Alessa's research team, trying desperately to understand what kind of technology could produce the strange, ghost-like pattern of failures they had documented. Aboard the Wraith, Captain Reyes received updates from a network of quiet listening posts scattered along the border, relayed back to Earth, and then forward to his ship through a careful chain of secure, low-power transmissions. The news was not good. "They know something is coming," Reyes told his senior staff, gathered in the small briefing room just off the bridge. "Not what we are, not how we're doing this, but they know something is heading toward Drax's Hold, and they're reinforcing it heavily." "How heavily?" asked Okafor. Current estimates put 3 additional warships in orbit, with more arriving over the next few days, Reyes said. Ground defenses have also been increased. This is no longer the lightly guarded prison world our original mission briefing described. The room was quiet for a moment as everyone absorbed the news. Elena Cho, sitting near the back of the room, spoke up first. Does this change the mission? Reyes considered the question carefully. It changes the difficulty, not the mission itself. We are still going to Drax's hold. We are still bringing those 12 prisoners home. But we need to be smarter about how we approach it, because a straightforward extraction is no longer realistic against those numbers. What about the field? Asked Barrett, the young weapons officer. If they know something is coming, does that mean they might find a way to detect us? Elena? Reyes said, turning the question over to her. Elena shook her head slowly. Detecting us requires understanding what we're doing, and as far as I can tell from the intelligence we've received, they still have no real idea. They know something is happening. They don't know how. Without that knowledge, more ships and more sensors mostly just means more chances for someone to get lucky and spot us at the wrong moment, not a fundamentally better ability to find us. That's still a real risk, Okafor pointed out. It is, Elena agreed. But it's a manageable one, as long as we remain careful. Reyes nodded, appreciating the honesty in the room. This was exactly why he trusted this crew, each of them willing to speak plainly about both the dangers and the possibilities, rather than either panicking or pretending the situation was simpler than it actually was. Here's what we're going to do, Reyes said, pulling up a detailed map of the Drax's hold system on the briefing room's main display. We slow our approach. Instead of a direct route, we take a longer path that keeps us further from their reinforced patrol routes. It will cost us an extra day, but it reduces our exposure significantly. He traced a new course across the display, one that curved wide around the most heavily patrolled regions, before approaching the prison world from an unexpected angle. Once we're in position, we don't rush the extraction. We take time to study their patrol patterns, their guard rotations, their defense grid. We find the quietest possible moment to move, and when we move fast and precise. In and out before anyone fully understands what's happening. And if something goes wrong during the extraction itself, Barrett asked, if we're spotted? Reyes's expression hardened slightly. Then we do what this ship was built to do. We fight our way out. The Wraith carries more firepower than any single Vorlon warship in that system, field or no field. We are not defenseless if things go wrong. But our goal, our real goal, is to make sure things don't go wrong in the first place. The crew nodded, understanding settling over the room. This was no longer a simple, quiet mission. It had become something more dangerous, more demanding, requiring not just the Wraith's hidden technology, but the skill and discipline of every single person aboard. Over the following 2 days, the Wraith adjusted its course, moving carefully along the wider, safer path Reyes had chosen. Elena Cho used the extra time to study the strange field drift she had noticed earlier, running dozens of tests and simulations, trying to understand its cause before it became a real problem. Late on the second night, working alone in the ship's small engineering lab, she finally found something. "Captain," she said over the ship's internal comm, her voice carrying a note of excitement she hadn't shown in days. "I think I found the source of the drift." Reyes made his way to the lab immediately, along with Okafor. Elena had a dozen data readouts spread across her workstation, lines of numbers and graphs that meant little to Reyes, but clearly meant a great deal to her. "What did you find?" he asked. "It's not a flaw in the field generator itself," Elena explained. "It's an interaction with something in this region of space, some kind of background radiation that's slightly different from what we tested against back home. The field has to work a little harder to compensate, and that extra strain is what's causing the drift." "Is it dangerous?" Reyes asked. "Manageable, now that I understand it," Elena said. "I can adjust the field's calibration to account for the radiation. It won't eliminate the drift completely, but it will slow it down significantly, buying us much more time before it becomes a real concern." "How long to make the adjustment?" "A few hours," Elena said. "I'll need to take the field offline briefly to recalibrate it properly." Reyes felt a familiar tension return to his shoulders. "How long offline?" "No more than 20 minutes, if everything goes smoothly," Elena said. "I'll need you to find us the safest possible window to do it." somewhere quiet, far from any patrol routes. Reyes turned to Okafor. "Find us that window." "On it," Okafor said, already moving back toward the bridge. 2 hours later, deep in a quiet, empty stretch of space, far from any known Vorland patrol routes, the Wraith came to a near stop, its engines reduced to the barest minimum needed to maintain position. Elena worked quickly and carefully in the engineering lab, her hands moving with practiced precision as she adjusted the delicate systems that had kept them hidden for weeks. On the bridge, Reyes watched the ship's sensors carefully. Every part of him tensed for the smallest sign of danger. 20 minutes without the field felt like an eternity this deep in enemy territory, even in a stretch of space believed to be empty. "Field is offline," Elena reported over the comm. "Beginning recalibration now." The minutes crawled by. Reyes forced himself to breathe evenly, to project calm for the sake of his crew, even as his own instincts screamed at him to move, to do something, anything, other than simply wait. 15 minutes, Okafor reported quietly, her eyes never leaving her sensor display. Nothing appeared on the screens. No ships, no patrols, nothing but the quiet emptiness of space, exactly as Okafor had promised. 10 minutes, she said, a short while later. Still nothing. Finally, after what felt like far longer than 20 minutes, Elena's voice came back over the comm, tired but satisfied. "Recalibration complete, bringing the field back online now." A moment later, the familiar hum returned to the ship's systems, and Reyes felt the tension in his shoulders finally begin to ease. "Field is stable," Elena confirmed. "Drift rate has dropped to almost nothing. We should be good for the rest of the mission." "Good work," Reyes said, meaning it deeply. "Resume course. Let's get back on track toward Drax's hold." The Wraith moved forward once more, its engines building back up to their previous speed, carrying its crew steadily toward the reinforced prison world and the 12 prisoners waiting there, unaware that a rescue was coming, unaware of just how close, and how dangerous, that rescue was about to become. 3 days later, the Wraith reached the outer edge of the Drax's hold system, and Reyes finally got his first real look at exactly what his crew was up against. The display filled with icons representing Vorlan warships, 7 of them now, far more than the original mission briefing had described, spread out in a careful defensive formation around the prison world. Ground-based sensor arrays dotted the planet's surface, and orbital defense platforms added even more firepower to an already formidable picture. "That's a lot more than we planned for," Barrett said quietly, staring at the display. "It is," Reyes agreed. "But we knew this was coming. Elena, how's the field holding against this kind of concentrated sensor coverage?" "Steady for now," Elena said, studying her own readouts carefully. "But this is denser coverage than anything we've faced so far. I won't lie to you, Captain. This is going to be close." Reyes studied the defensive formation for a long, quiet moment, his mind already working through possibilities, calculating angles of approach, timing windows, and contingency plans. Somewhere down on that heavily defended world, 12 human prisoners were waiting, most of them likely believing by now that no rescue would ever come. He intended to prove them wrong. "All right," he said finally, turning to his crew. "Let's find our way in." For 3 full days, the Wraith sat quietly at the edge of the Drax's hold system, hidden in the dark between 2 dead asteroids, watching and waiting. Captain Reyes had learned long ago that patience was often the most powerful weapon a commander could use, and this moment called for exactly that kind of patience. Lieutenant Okafor led the watch, cataloging every patrol route, every guard rotation, every small pattern in the movement of the 7 Vorlan warships circling the prison world below. Slowly, a picture began to form. "There," Okafor said on the 3rd day, pointing to a section of her display. "Every 26 hours, there's a gap. The 2 warships covering the southern approach both pull back briefly to rendezvous with a supply ship. It only lasts about 40 minutes, but during that window, the southern approach to the planet is far less guarded than any other direction." Reyes leaned in, studying the pattern for himself. "How confident are you in this?" "We've watched it happen 3 times now, always at roughly the same interval," Okafor said. "It looks like a standard supply rendezvous, probably scheduled well in advance and unlikely to change." "Elena, how's the field holding after 3 days of continuous operation, this close to their sensor grid?" "Stressed, but stable," Elena answered from her station. "The recalibration is holding well. I'd still recommend we move as soon as a good window opens, rather than waiting longer than necessary." Reyes nodded, already forming the plan in his mind. "Then we move during the next gap. Okafor, confirm the timing. Barrett, I want weapons ready, but only as a last resort. Elena, I need everything the field can give us during the approach and extraction." "Understood," came the responses from around the bridge. 22 hours later, exactly on schedule, the two southern warships began their slow drift toward the rendezvous point with the incoming supply vessel. Reyes watched the gap begin to open on his display and felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came before every dangerous moment of a mission. "This is it," he said quietly. "Helm, take us in, slow and steady." The Wraith emerged from its hiding place between the two asteroids and began its final approach toward Drax's hold, sliding through the newly opened gap in the planet's defenses with careful, measured precision. Every person on the bridge understood the stakes now. A single mistake, a single moment of bad luck, could turn this from a quiet, successful rescue into a battle against 7 warships and an entire planetary defense grid. "Distance to planet, 60,000 miles and closing," Okafor reported, her voice steady, despite the tension clearly written across her face. "Field integrity holding at 92%, no signs of detection." "Ground defenses?" Reyes asked. "Quiet so far," Okafor said. "Standard patrol patterns, nothing unusual." The ship continued its careful descent, moving through the gap in the defense grid, past the outer edge of the planet's atmosphere, down toward the surface, where Drax's Hold's main prison facility sat. A grim gray complex surrounded by high walls and heavily armed guard towers. "Approaching extraction coordinates," Okafor said. 30 seconds. Reyes turned to his ground team leader, a quiet, capable officer named Lieutenant Diego Marsh, who stood ready near the ship's small shuttle bay with 4 heavily armed soldiers. "Marsh, you're clear to go the moment we're in position. In and out, fast as you can." "Understood, Captain," Marsh said, already moving toward the shuttle. The Wraith settled into a low hover, just above the prison complex, close enough that its shadow would have been visible against the ground had anyone below thought to look up, though the field kept it hidden from every sensor that might have noticed. The shuttle bay doors opened, and Marsh's team dropped quickly and quietly toward the compound below. Inside the prison, deep in a small, cold holding cell, 12 human prisoners sat together, most of them thin and tired after 2 long years of captivity. Their unofficial leader, a former science officer named Dr. Priya Nair, had long since stopped believing that rescue was coming. She had told herself, and the others, that survival meant giving up on hope of escape and simply focusing on staying alive, day by day, until some diplomatic solution eventually freed them. She did not expect the sudden, quiet sound of the cell door's lock disengaging in the middle of the night. She sat up immediately, heart pounding, as the door slid open to reveal 4 armed figures in unfamiliar combat gear, and behind them, a 5th figure, who spoke with a voice she recognized instantly as human. "Dr. Nair?" Marsh said quietly. "We're here to bring you home. Move fast, stay quiet, and follow exactly what we say." For a moment, Priya simply stared, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then, quickly, she turned to the other prisoners, most of them already stirring awake, confusion and disbelief crossing their tired faces. "Everyone up," she said, her voice shaking slightly with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. "Now, we're going home." The extraction moved quickly. Marsh's team guided the 12 prisoners through the quiet corridors of the prison, using access codes and pathways carefully mapped out during the 3 days of surveillance. Twice, they had to freeze in place as a guard patrol passed nearby, their hearts pounding as they waited in the shadows, but each time, the patrol moved on without noticing anything unusual. Within 11 minutes, all 12 prisoners had been safely loaded onto the shuttle, and Marsh gave the signal to return to the Wraith. On the bridge, Reyes watched the shuttle's ascent with tightly controlled tension. "Shuttle is away, Captain," Okafor confirmed. "All 12 prisoners aboard, along with our extraction team. No casualties, no alarms triggered." A wave of relief moved through the bridge, though Reyes did not allow himself to relax just yet. "Get them aboard and secured. The moment they're clear, we start moving out." The shuttle docked smoothly with the Wraith, and within minutes, 12 exhausted, overwhelmed former prisoners stood in the ship's cargo bay, surrounded by human crew members for the first time in 2 years. Dr. Nair, standing at the front of the group, looked around at the ship with an expression of pure disbelief. "How?" she said quietly, to no one in particular. "How did you get us out without them even knowing?" One of the crew members, a young medic checking over the prisoner's condition, simply smiled. "That's classified, ma'am. But you're safe now. That's what matters." On the bridge, Reyes allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. "All right, let's take us home. Helm, best safe speed back toward the border." The Wraith began its ascent away from Drax's hold, rising steadily back toward open space, retracing the careful path that had brought it here. For a moment, it seemed as though the mission might conclude exactly as planned, a quiet, perfect success that the Vorlon Empire would never fully understand. Then, everything changed. "Captain!" Okafor's voice cut through the bridge, sharp with alarm. "The 2 Southern patrol ships are returning early. Their supply rendezvous just ended. They're heading back toward their original position, and our current course puts us directly in their path." Reyes felt his stomach drop. "Time to intercept?" 6 minutes, Okafor said, already working frantically at her console. "Captain, if we hold this course, we'll pass within visual range of both ships. Even with the field active, that's too close for comfort, especially with our recent field stress." "Elena?" Reyes called out. "Can you push the field higher?" "I can push to 95%, Elena said, already working at her station, her fingers moving rapidly across her controls. "But that's close to the edge of what the system can safely handle, especially after 3 days of continuous operation." Reyes made his decision instantly. "Do it. We have 12 civilians aboard who did not survive 2 years of captivity, just to be caught in a firefight now." 95%. Engaging now, Elena confirmed, her voice tight with concentration. The Wraith adjusted its course slightly, angling away from the most direct intercept path with the returning patrol ships, while Elena pushed the distortion field to levels it had never before been tested at during an active mission. On the bridge, everyone watched the display in tense silence, as the 2 Vorlon patrol ships grew steadily closer. Aboard the lead patrol ship, a young sensor officer glanced at his display and frowned slightly at a brief, strange flicker along one edge of his screen. He had heard, through informal channels, about the strange anomalies being investigated by Fleet Command over the past several weeks. For a moment, his hand hovered over the alert button. Then the flicker vanished, and his screen returned to its normal, empty display, showing nothing but open space, exactly as expected. He hesitated another moment, then decided against raising an alarm over something so brief and inconclusive. He made a note in his log instead, intending to mention it during the standard debrief, and returned his attention to the rest of his duties. On the Wraith, Okafor let out a slow breath as the 2 patrol ships continued past, resuming their original position without any sign of pursuit. "They're moving on, Captain. No change in their course or speed. I don't think they detected us." Reyes felt the tension slowly begin to drain from his shoulders. "Elena, bring the field back down to a sustainable level. We're clear of the immediate danger." "Bringing it down now," Elena said, though her voice carried an unmistakable note of exhaustion. A moment later, an alarm chimed softly at her station, and her expression shifted to one of concern. "Captain, I'm seeing some irregularities in the field generator readings. Nothing critical yet, but that last push may have caused some strain we'll need to look at carefully once we're clear of this system." "Understood," Reyes said. "Let's focus on getting clear first. We'll deal with repairs once we're safely back across the border." The Wraith continued its careful retreat from the Drax's hold system, moving steadily back toward the outer edge of Vorlon territory, its crew and newly rescued passengers alike holding their breath through every remaining checkpoint along the way. Slowly, painstakingly, mile by careful mile, they made their way back toward the border, each hour, bringing them closer to the safety of human space. Behind them, at Fleet Command, Grand Admiral Voss received the daily security report from Drax's hold, with growing frustration. The prison break had been discovered only hours after it happened, when a routine cell check found the holding block empty, the 12 prisoners simply gone without a trace. No sign of forced entry, no alarms triggered, nothing but an empty cell, and a mystery no one on the planet could explain. 12 prisoners. Voss said, staring at the report with barely controlled anger. Removed from one of the most heavily guarded facilities in this sector, without a single alarm, without a single trace, right under the noses of 7 warships and an entire planetary defense grid. "It matches the pattern we've been tracking, sir," said Dr. Ilessa, standing nearby with a datapad full of her own analysis. The anomaly signature was detected once more, near the southern patrol route, shortly before the prisoners disappeared. "I believe, with reasonable confidence, that this confirms our theory. Something, some kind of vessel, is capable of moving through our space, essentially undetected, and it just successfully extracted 12 prisoners from the heart of our most secure facility." Voss was silent for a long moment, his anger slowly giving way to something colder, something more focused. "Then we have confirmation of the threat. Whatever this ship is, wherever it came from, it has just proven that our sensor technology, our entire defensive doctrine, is fundamentally vulnerable. I want everything, all of it, thrown into solving this problem. I do not care about the cost." "Yes, sir," Ilessa said. "And find me that ship," Voss added, his voice hardening further. "Wherever it is, however it managed this, I want to know. This cannot happen again." But even as he gave the order, deep in the back of his mind, Voss understood something he did not yet want to admit out loud. The ship responsible for this humiliation was very likely already gone, slipping back across the border into human territory, carrying its rescued prisoners and its impossible secret with it, leaving behind nothing but confusion, embarrassment, and the first real crack in 400 years of Vorland confidence. Aboard the Wraith, 3 days later, Captain Reyes stood on the bridge as the display finally showed the ship crossing back over the border into human territory. A quiet cheer rippled through the crew, the first real celebration since the mission had begun. "We're home," Okafor said, a wide smile breaking across her tired face. Reyes allowed himself a small smile of his own, though his mind was already turning toward what came next. They had succeeded, against all odds, in doing something no one had ever believed possible. But he understood, better than most, that this success would not go unanswered. The Vorlan Empire had just learned, in the most humiliating way possible, that their sensors could be beaten. They would not simply accept that lesson quietly. Somewhere behind them, deep in Vorlan territory, Grand Admiral Voss was already mobilizing every resource at his disposal to understand and counter the technology that had just made a fool of his entire fleet. The quiet, careful phase of this conflict was ending. What came next would be far louder and far more dangerous. 6 months passed after the Wraith's return, and in that time, the story of the ghost ship that had slipped through the Vorlan Empire's defenses spread quietly through both human and Vorlan space, growing larger and stranger with every telling. Inside the Vorlan military, the humiliation of the Draxus Hold incident had not faded. If anything, it had grown sharper with time, fueled by Grand Admiral Voss's relentless determination to understand what had happened and ensure it could never happen again. Dr. Alessa's research team had grown from a dozen scientists to over 200, working around the clock, studying every scrap of data collected during the incursion, trying to reverse engineer a technology they still did not fully understand. They had made some progress. Vorlan sensor arrays across the Empire had been upgraded with new filtering systems, designed to catch the kind of brief, strange anomalies that had once been dismissed as noise. Patrol patterns had been randomized, making it harder for any intruder to predict gaps in coverage. Security protocols on sensitive facilities had been tightened considerably. But none of it had solved the fundamental problem. None of it explained how a single ship had crossed deep into their territory and back out again, undetected, not once but repeatedly, over the course of nearly 2 weeks. Grand Admiral Voss knew, with growing certainty, that this was not the end of the matter. Humanity had proven it could reach into the heart of Vorlan space whenever it chose. That was not a threat that could simply be studied and filed away. It demanded a response, and Voss intended to deliver one that would restore Vorlan prestige and prove, once and for all, that the Empire's power had not truly been diminished. He requested, and received, permission for a massive show of force. A fleet of 40 warships, the largest single deployment the sector had seen in decades, to be sent directly toward the human border, with orders to demand a formal accounting for the Draxus Hold incident and to make clear, through overwhelming numbers, that the Vorlon Empire would not tolerate further incursions into its territory. It was, in many ways, exactly the kind of response Admiral Whitfield had predicted months earlier, back when the mission was first being planned. A fleet meant to intimidate, to remind everyone watching that the Vorlon Empire still commanded more ships, more firepower, more raw military strength than humanity could ever hope to match in open battle. What Voss did not know, could not have known, was that the Wraith's success had triggered something far larger within Earth's own military development programs. Elena Cho's distortion field, once a fragile experimental system installed in a single ship, had spent the last 6 months being refined, expanded, and adapted by teams of engineers working around the clock, inspired by the proof that stealth technology on this scale was not only possible, but achievable, with the resources humanity already possessed. By the time Voss's fleet of 40 warships crossed toward the border, 3 more human ships had been quietly equipped with improved versions of the same technology, forming a small but capable task force, under Captain Reyes's command, waiting patiently near the border, for exactly this kind of confrontation. "They're bringing everything they have," Okafor reported, studying the massive Vorlan fleet's approach on the Wraith's main display. 40 warships, Captain. That's more firepower than we've ever seen in one place." Reyes studied the display calmly, his expression giving away none of the tension he felt inside. "They want to remind us who we're dealing with. A show of strength, meant to make us afraid, meant to make us back down, and apologize quietly for what happened at Drax's hold." "Are we going to?" Barrett asked. "No," Reyes said simply. "We're going to remind them why that kind of show doesn't work against an enemy they can't fully see." Admiral Whitfield's orders had been clear from the beginning. This was not meant to be a war. Humanity had no interest in destroying the Vorlon fleet, or escalating the conflict beyond what was necessary. But if the Vorlon Empire arrived at the border expecting fear and submission, they needed to leave with a very different understanding of what humanity was capable of. The Vorlon fleet arrived at the border 3 days later, 40 warships spread out in an imposing formation, their combined firepower more than enough to level a dozen planets. Grand Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Reach, watching the empty stretch of space ahead of them with grim satisfaction. "Send the message," he ordered. "Standard demand for formal accounting regarding the Drax's hold incident, along with our expectation of immediate compliance." The message went out, broadcast across every frequency likely to reach human ears, a formal, carefully worded demand, backed by the unmistakable threat of 40 warships sitting just outside the border. For several long minutes, there was no response. Then, without warning, every radar screen across the entire Vorlan fleet went dark. Not one ship, not 2 ships. All 40 warships, simultaneously, lost radar function completely, their screens filled with nothing but static and confusion. Alarms blared across the fleet, as officer after officer scrambled to understand what was happening, checking power systems, checking equipment, finding nothing wrong yet seeing nothing on their displays either. On the Dominion's Reach, Voss stood frozen for a moment, staring at his own darkened tactical display, a cold understanding settling over him. "Report," he barked. "What is happening?" "Sir, all sensor systems are down fleet-wide," his tactical officer said, his voice shaking slightly. "We have no explanation. Every ship is reporting the same failure, simultaneously." For nearly 90 seconds, the entire Vorlon fleet sat blind in open space, unable to see anything beyond their own hulls, utterly vulnerable to any attack that might come during that window. It was, without question, the single most vulnerable moment the Vorlon military had experienced in living memory. Then, just as suddenly as it had happened, the radar screens flickered back to life, and there, sitting calmly in the empty space directly between the Vorlon fleet and the human border, was a single ship. The Wraith, fully visible now, its weapons powered, but not raised, its presence an unmistakable statement. Voss stared at the display, his mind working rapidly to process what he was seeing. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's the ship." "Sir," his communications officer said, "we're receiving a transmission. Put it through." Captain Reyes's voice filled the bridge of the Dominion's Reach, calm, measured, and unmistakably confident. "Grand Admiral Voss, this is Captain Marcus Reyes, of the human vessel Wraith. I believe you were looking for an explanation regarding the events at Drax's Hold. Consider this a demonstration." Voss said nothing for a long moment, studying the single ship on his display with a mixture of anger and something closer to reluctant respect. "You expect me to believe that one ship just disabled the sensors of my entire fleet?" Voss finally said, his voice carrying across the open channel. "I don't expect you to believe anything, Admiral," Reyes replied. "I expect you to understand what just happened. For 90 seconds, your entire fleet was blind. If our intentions had been hostile, that window would have been more than enough to cause catastrophic losses across your formation. We chose not to use it that way, because we are not interested in starting a war neither side truly wants." Voss's jaw tightened. "Then what do you want, Captain?" "Simple," Reyes said. "An understanding. The prisoners held at Drax's Hold were human citizens, taken during what both our governments agreed was an unfortunate accident. We reclaimed what was ours. We have no interest in further conflict with the Vorlon Empire, provided the Vorlon Empire has no further interest in holding human citizens against their will, or in testing how much more this ship, and others like it, are capable of." There was a long silence on the other end of the channel. Voss stared at the single human ship on his display, understanding with painful clarity the position he now found himself in. 40 warships, the largest fleet his sector could muster, had just been rendered completely helpless for 90 full seconds by a single vessel that could apparently choose the timing and duration of that vulnerability at will. There was no way to know if it could happen again, no way to know how many more ships like the Wraith existed, no way to know what other capabilities remained hidden. Attacking now, in anger, risked exposing his entire fleet to an unknown level of danger, all to defend a position that had already been thoroughly, publicly humiliated. "Stand down, all forward positions," Voss finally said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration, addressing his own bridge crew rather than Reyes directly. "Recall the fleet to standard formation." Then, more quietly, he addressed the open channel once more. "You've made your point, Captain." "I hope so, Admiral," Reyes replied. "For both our sakes." The transmission ended, and slowly, methodically, the massive Vorlon fleet began pulling back from the border, their intended show of overwhelming force transformed instead into a very public demonstration of exactly how vulnerable they truly were against an enemy whose full capabilities remained a mystery. News of the encounter spread quickly through both human and Vorland space in the following weeks, though the details grew more exaggerated with each retelling. Among human military circles, the story became a point of quiet, confident pride. A single battleship had faced down an entire enemy fleet and forced a peaceful resolution without firing a single shot. Among the Vorlon Empire, the story became something closer to a cautionary tale, whispered carefully among officers who had once believed their sensor technology made them untouchable. Grand Admiral Voss never fully recovered his previous standing within Vorlon Fleet Command. Though he retained his position, his experience still considered too valuable to discard entirely. He spent the remaining years of his career overseeing a massive, expensive research program dedicated to understanding and countering human stealth technology, a program that produced incremental improvements but never fully closed the gap that had been so painfully exposed at the border that day. Aboard the Wraith, Captain Reyes received a personal commendation from Admiral Whitfield, along with quiet, unofficial recognition throughout Earth's military command, as the officer who had proven, definitively, that clever technology and careful strategy could overcome even the largest, most confident enemy fleet. Dr. Elena Cho continued her work, now leading a much larger research division dedicated to refining and expanding the distortion field technology across the entire human fleet. She never sought public recognition for what she had built, preferring instead to remain focused on the next problem, the next improvement, the next quiet advantage that might one day save human lives. The 12 rescued prisoners returned to their families, their ordeal finally over, carrying with them a story that few people would ever fully believe, that they had been rescued not by a massive fleet or a dramatic battle, but by a single, quiet ship that had simply walked past an entire empire's defenses, as though they weren't there at all. And throughout Vorland space, in outposts and fleet yards and quiet listening posts scattered across the empire, a new kind of caution began to take hold. Radar operators who had once dismissed strange, brief anomalies without a second thought now paused, now double-checked, now wondered. Every time their screens flickered even slightly, whether they were witnessing nothing more than a simple glitch, or the quiet passage of something far more dangerous than their instruments could ever fully understand. Humanity had entered Vorlon space with a single battleship, and every enemy radar had failed. In doing so, they had not just rescued 12 prisoners or avoided a war. They had rewritten, permanently, the rules by which every future confrontation between the two empires would be judged. Strength, the Vorlon Empire had always believed, was measured in numbers and firepower. Humanity had just proven, quietly and decisively, that strength could also be measured in patience, ingenuity, and the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that something was impossible, just because no one had done it before. The Wraith returned to its home port not long after, its long mission finally complete. But its legend, quiet as the ship itself had always been, was only just beginning.